to Safe Inside, brought to you by TheraTribe. I'm Jeremy Loomis, and these are my conversations with Sandra Fields, an LPC and certified clinical trauma treatment provider with over 35 years' experience helping people who have been through trauma. Welcome back to the TheraTribe podcast. I'm Jeremy.
I'm Sandy.
And we've been talking in the last couple episodes about attachment, and where trauma figures into that. This week, we're going to talk about attunement. For those who are hearing this word in this context for the first time, Sandy, what is attunement?
Well, attunement is literally when we are in tune with the person that's with us, right? And so for me to be attuned to you, I would be looking at you and watching and paying attention and really listening to what's happening. And then as you communicate it to me, I would then respect that communication and hear it, right? And so we've been talking about attachment, and attunement is part of how that attachment process works. So, there are some children that we see, they seem really kind of sad and withdrawn and all of that. And we see other kids who are very curious and self-confident and happy, or they feel, they cheerful. And really the differences around that is really around that attachment and attunement a lot of the time. That attunement and that emotional communication starts at birth. I actually believe it starts before birth, but people say it starts at birth. I mean, we're talking to our baby in the womb. We are spending time with our baby in the womb. So I do believe, but the baby's not able to communicate a lot to us in the womb. So at birth, the baby has ways of communicating to us.
I know that this isn't the easiest thing to gauge in like proper research, but I've heard people talk about babies knowing when they're not wanted while they're in the womb.
I think so. I think there's probably some hormonal stuff around that too, but the mother is definitely communicating. We do know that. It's just the attunement requires both of you communicating back and forth, right? And so we used to think that babies they just were babies. They just were beings, and they didn't really have emotions and didn't react. And they
the blank slate idea.
Yeah, that tabula rasa, blank slate. But we now know that babies are very sensitive to their surroundings and to the people that are caring for them, especially their primary caregiver. Most literature says it's the mother, but it's really the primary caregiver. They'll respond to the other caregiver if there's another one in the picture, but there's usually one primary caregiver to which they are sort of attached as they go along.
How it's kind of strange to try to pull it apart and think, well, okay, why did we ever think that way? Because unless you're just assuming that someone has to begin to have their own concrete memories before they can start to be a person, it's like going back to our discussion about mirror neurons. It's like, well, you're kind of recognizing another of your own kind. Human. And then to think of, well, how do you make another human? It's like you're coming from a DNA code. You're self-replicating. Why would it not be another real person where the other real things happen inside of them?
Well, I think it seems self-evident now, but at the time when we based sentience and experience and all on language, and what people could communicate back to us, this was at a time that, even people who were deaf, who were unable to speak, they were not necessarily always seen as full people, really, unfortunately, right? There was a lot of ableism because people weren't seen as full humans. And so, if we put that in context, infants could not communicate according to those rules. Now, infants communicate a lot, but according to those rules, they could not. And so therefore they had to grow and develop into that full sentience kind of. So that's just putting it in context. Of course, now we go, what? But back then it seemed logical and reasonable, right? I think there'll be things that, our grandkids will look back and go, what?
Yeah. I'm quite sure there will be.
There will be a lot of things.
It's a strange thing to think about.
It is a strange thing, but But the babies are very sensitive. And how the primary caregiver responds to the baby teaches the baby emotions and how to feel those emotions. It determines what emotions that baby is going to experience.
And I don't want to step on, because I know you have a direction you're heading with all this, but just to throw out for consideration, if there is a way in which it's different for a baby than it is for the rest of us, just for your consideration, they haven't had a chance to put up a guard yet.
Right, right.
That changes a lot.
Yeah, the problem is actually they have no guard, and so they're sponging in everything. So those interactions that are taking place, whether they are good or bad, or healthy or not healthy, they'll greatly impact the way that the baby then grows up to interact with themselves in the world. That is what they're learning then. So there is no guard in order for them to learn. They are a sponge. And really, most of that communication both ways is nonverbal. Even our communication is mostly nonverbal. Only about 5% or so is what we say. It's all of these other things, our tone of voice, our body language, all of those things impact a lot more than the actual words that we're speaking.
It's a strange thing to think in a society that values what is rational and what is rationally expressed. But in a way, it's like the words are there for bringing shape to what we're trying to express. But like, imagine if the heart behind it were just absent. How engaged would we remain in anything that was worth talking about?
Well, we wouldn't. I don't like to listen to anyone who's monotone, for instance, right? So we wouldn't be engaged. It takes that attunement in order for people to feel engaged in anything. And that attunement is that communication back and forth. So, as we're talking about babies, I'm going to give you a couple examples, the same example, but with two different moms, and to show you how that attunement works. So the mom and the baby, they're playing peekaboo. That's a game that we all play. And they're back and forth. The little baby, he hides his face and shows his face. His mom goes, "Oh, I see you now," peekaboo. And then the baby gets overstimulated and he gets a little bit, okay, this is enough. I'm a little done right now. So the first baby puts his thumb in his mouth and he turns his head away from mom. And mom just waits. And when he's ready, he comes back and she goes, "Oh, I'm glad to see you back. Peekaboo," right? And that baby feels like mom heard him because his need was, okay, I'm a little overstimulated. I need a second, right? So when he did that, mom just waited. He came back and mom's like, "Okay, we're ready to engage again." So mom was attuned to what that baby needed at the moment. Let's take that same baby with a different type of mom. They're playing peekaboo. It's going well. The baby gets overstimulated. And so he does, as many babies do. He puts his thumb in his mouth and he turns away for a minute to regroup and kind of calm himself down. They do that at about 6, 7, 8 months old. They will do that. So as he does that, mom, on the other hand, comes around, she brings her body around and gets in his face. "Oh, peekaboo," or pulls his thumb out of his mouth, or pulls his face back around. "Oh, peekaboo," or walks around where he is and doesn't give him that space. And so what that child is learning there, he's learning that his needs don't really matter, that mom is not going to hear them, and his needs aren't going to be met. And in that moment, he's going to start pulling further back from his mom. He gets more and more stimulated. And it's like, if I'm around her, it gets really kind of scary and I can't cope and I'm going to pull further and further back. And depending on moms, again, we're not putting any blame or responsibility. We all are doing what we're doing. The first mom was a securely attached mom herself. She was able to wait until the baby came back because in a secure attachment, it is just what's right? The second mom had anxious attachment. I described someone with anxious attachment. And as the baby pulled away, she got anxious. And so she's like, "Oh, no, no, no," And again, it's not that she was a bad person. It was just that it triggered her attachment style.
Yeah. That's going to be a hard thing to hear it could be very helpful, but context and language to what your experience was, if you were the child in the situation, could be a little more difficult to hear if you're the mom who matches that situation. So I think that it's important to recognize we're not really trying to throw anybody under the bus, but we are
Mhm.
trying to help people work through these fundamental things that have shaped their entire life so far.
Mm.
There's still time to repair a relationship and even relearn what the dynamics of that relationship can look like. But yeah, sometimes these fundamental things have to be acknowledged, and then it's like resetting the bones so the healing can
Mhm.
begin.
It's funny that you said repair because that's actually where I was going to go.
Ah, okay.
There is a process. We're going to get to that in a minute because as I'm talking about that attunement or that misattunement, it can happen to every parent. It's going to happen.
Mm.
We don't always see what the baby is doing, or we don't always interpret what the baby needs. That misattunement happens to every single parent. I'm going to remind those of you who've been listening and those of you who haven't, here's some new knowledge. We know that the good enough parent is good enough 30% of the time. Period. That's it. If a parent is good enough 30% of the time, that's enough. So it doesn't take a lot. We are going to be misaligned. We are not going to be always attuned with our infant. I'm not always attuned with my husband, and he's an adult who's trying to attune back. We miss it sometimes. But when that happens, there is that's a rupture. It's a rupture in the relationship. And in trauma work, we call that the rupture and repair process because that's exactly what happens. The relationship kind of disconnects, it ruptures. And then if we can repair it intentionally and in a way, it actually makes the relationship stronger.
Mm.
So the rupture and repair process is similar to lifting weights. When I lift weights, or not me, because obviously I don't lift them that much, but someone who actually lifts weights on purpose, they lift them. And what happens is it actually causes small tears in their muscles. And then it tears and then it repairs. And as it repairs back stronger and a little bit bigger. That's how you build the big muscles. It literally is a rupture repair process.
Mm.
Our relationships are the same. And in trauma work, we understand that relationships do rupture. But in order to grow it back stronger, then you are careful to repair it in a way, that's good. So in that second instance, when that baby pulled further away, that mom who had the anxious attachment style, if she was working on her stuff and she recognized that, she could have maybe possibly realized what was happening and could have stepped in and said, "Oh, I see that you're upset. Let me step back and give you a moment to calm down."
Mm.
The baby may or may not have understood the words. They understand a lot more words before they can talk. So maybe some of that. Or I see that it's too much for you. Let me just sit quietly for a moment. Or even if she just stepped back and sat quietly for a moment, because at that point she realized what was happening, just that and giving that baby that space to regroup and to calm down and be less stimulated, that could have repaired that relationship right then and there.
Mm.
It didn't have to go bad. And that's why that 30% rule is so good. Because parents, if you're good enough 30% of the time, but in the other 70% of the time, you're not, there are going to be these misattunements. However, in that 30%, if you're good enough, you are repairing. You are definitely repairing these relationships. We get that sometimes in couples counseling. Couples will come to counseling and they'll have all these things that they haven't said to their partners because they don't want to make it worse. They're afraid that they're going to leave. They're afraid it's going to blow up. They're afraid of all of these things. Usually that's from attachment trauma because we know that we need to say those things. We need to blow it up, not the whole relationship, but we need to speak those things, speak those truths in a healthy way, but we need to speak them. Take the chance that the relationship is rupturing because we need to rupture it. And then we need to say, okay, here are the issues that you've been holding back that's made you come to counseling. So let's now repair all of this in a way that's healthy and good.
Mm.
That's actually most of couples work, to be honest. It feels like, doesn't it? Unless that's just me.
Yeah. Feeling safe to make yourself known.
Mm-hmm. See, that's what the attunement is all about in the attachment. It is making itself safe for that baby's authentic self to emerge and grow. And when we have trauma in that area, we have a hard time allowing our own authentic self out to attune to anyone.
Mm.
But as we do that rupture and repair process, it teaches us that it's okay to be authentic, and it's okay if other people don't always agree or feel okay with who we are, because we can repair and it will be all right.
Mm.
Right? It's
Yeah.
okay to be who you are. And it's all around that baby learning. That is all about attachment and attunement, learning to be your authentic self.
Mm. That makes me think about how if we paint it in high contrast, it's easy to recognize that you're not going to achieve the same gains in your workout with a Ginzu knife
Mm-hmm.
as you will with little tears from a normal workout, and that obviously.
Right.
But if you get so used to avoiding conflict that the little tears start to feel like big knives,
Mm-hmm.
then it can be harder to recognize that these little challenges are actually going to grow the relationship instead of threaten it.
Right. Because if your experience has been that those little tears are never repaired, then they become big tears after a while. Right. And of course, we're not talking about rupturing through trauma. That would be
Yeah.
using the Ginsu knife.
Yeah.
Right. That would be a different thing. And that doesn't grow your muscles. That damages the muscles. And we have to work hard to repair that. But we're talking about the natural, normal ruptures in a relationship. We talk about group dynamics being going through the forming, storming, norming, and performing in business and in group therapy as well. We talk about that. We have to have that storming part to move into that that forming, storming, norming part, and then to move into that performing part. That's that rupture process. In order to do that, we have to do that if we want the group to bring their authentic selves and to be able to perform. They have to have that rupture and repair process. That is literally what that is. That storming is that rupture, and that forming is that repair process. So then they can perform.
And I think this is an uncomfortable thing to shine a light on, but I do believe that that hesitancy generally comes from what I'll call a scarcity mindset that says, no, I want to keep what little I have, even though I'm not content with how little known I feel. I'm too afraid that I'm going to risk what little I have if I let myself be known.
Absolutely. And that goes down to back to this attunement and attachment. If you were a child who were misattuned more than the 30% of the time, or more than the 70% of the time, you learned that your authentic self was not acceptable and that you were invisible, or if people responded in ways that felt punishing, that it was wrong. And so there becomes this core belief in how you see the world that if I risk letting this go, I'm not worthy of anything else.
Somehow these people all count and I don't count.
That's exactly what happens. And so it is holding on to something that, even if it's not good, even if it's painful, becomes, well, it's better than nothing. And because this is all I can get. It's that kind of a mindset. Yeah. Which is sad.
It's sad. And those are deep waters to find yourself in.
It is. It is. Living life with a partner where you feel like you have to be with them, and that you've settled for them, and you're just putting up with them per se and you can't make things better because that's better than nothing. I'd have to wonder, is it? Is it better to hide who you are your whole life? Or is it better to be who you are authentically? And if you lose some people along the way, they weren't your people, right? It's hard, though. It's hard. It's easier if you have an avoidant attachment style. Yeah, that's a joke, in case you didn't know that.
Easier on one specific level.
Yeah.
It's true what they say. It's like I'm gonna actually forget what it is they say. It's not no pain, no gain. It's nothing ventured, nothing gained. because it is something ventured. It's a gamble. The person who is apparently drawn to you enough to want to be together actually cares about you enough to want to know you.
Yes. Brene Brown says that vulnerability is the only bridge to true connection. And that vulnerability is showing our authentic self and being willing to be vulnerable in that, being willing to take that risk that they may misattune, they may reject, they may not meet our needs, but it's the only way to true connection. And I believe she's right. I think it is the only true bridge to real connection. So
Yeah.
I always see everything about counseling, no matter what I'm doing. I believe that the goal of every therapy session, every therapy client, everything leads to a more authentic self. I was taught that in school, and I've held on to that, because if we pull away the trauma, we pull away attachment, we pull away all of these things, what we're looking for is not a robot. We're looking for that authentic self that's hidden underneath all of those things. And we want to pull that out.
Yeah. And even though it can feel like a gamble, the reward is being celebrated for being a being.
Yeah.
And maybe that's worth the gamble. Maybe that's even worth the tenacity to keep trying until you find that freedom, even if it hurts to get there. Because maybe that's, I don't know, you'll have to decide for yourself, but maybe that's worth whatever it takes to get there in order for the rest of your life to look like that.
Right.
Is there anything else we need to wrap up before we call it an episode?
I think that did it. I think it's maybe you're worth fighting for.
Consider it. What are we talking about next time?
Well, I think we are talking about, who knows? It's a good question. How about the hidden epidemic of developmental trauma?
Let's do it.
Okay.
All right. Thanks for being here with us.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye.